see that it's a few minutes past the hour, so we'll go ahead now and get started with our live e-class this afternoon. Today, I'll be talking about 30 minutes to better asset management using ITIL and Agile. Just a few items here. We are recording this session and we'll have copies of the presentation deck for those who would like to review and share this information after the presentation. Also, I would be happy to take questions during the presentation and after the presentation, so certainly if you do have questions, please use the interface to raise your hand or type in questions using the question and answer pane of the interface. So you should be able to click on the bar at the top to pull down the question and answer window. So thank you again for attending. As we get started, I'll tell you all a little bit about myself and then give an overview of what we're going to be covering today. So as we talk about ITIL and Agile, my background has been primarily focused on the ITIL framework. More recently, I have been practicing and learning more about Agile methodology. So I do have my ITIL expert designation. I've been involved with ITIL for almost 20 years now. For Agile, though, I've only been a certified Scrum Master for a few years, so my experience in this area is much more recent. But I find that there are some parallels between the two, and certainly ways that ITIL can help Agile, and likewise Agile can help ITIL. So we'll talk about how we can use Agile methods to help us with the ITIL processes, and also how we can do the reverse, how we can use ITIL processes to help with some of our Agile development and deployment. The two frameworks, or the two schools of thought, are quite different. So I'll start by giving an overview of each, starting with Agile. I'll then talk about some of the specific methods behind the implementation of each, give you a little bit of information about the asset and configuration management process itself, and then talk about some key takeaways, how do we actually implement asset and configuration management in a way that is Agile, that is responsive, and is tuned into the needs of the business and the organizations which we serve. So let's get started. As the name implies, Agile is intended to be very responsive. It's very lean. So those are some of the other keywords that you hear. And it is focused on software development. So when we talk about Agile methods, we're typically talking about software development, but I have substituted the word processes for software here in this example because I feel that Agile is a good tool to use and it's a good methodology to follow as we're implementing ITIL processes. If we look at Agile Principles, I would focus here again on some of, I would say, items, to some extent item 8, but really 9 through 11 here. And again, I'm going to substitute the word process for software. If we look at 9, 10, and 11, this really speaks to some key takeaways for asset and configuration management. Obviously, as we are designing our infrastructure and implementing processes for asset and configuration management, good design is key. We want to simplify. So if we look at item 10 here, focusing on simplicity, I think that's one of the areas where we get stuck, especially nowadays. We've really tried hard in IT to simplify, standardize, streamline our operations, but in the age of bring your own device, that's an increasing challenge. So we have to be more creative and think about ways that we can simplify the platform so that it is successful and can be easily deployed regardless of the device that we're supporting. So we're forced to support countless devices nowadays within IT, at least when we're doing end user support. It's certainly if you're designing a platform, especially if you're thinking about a website, or really any cloud-based application that can be accessed through a handheld device, a smartphone, a tablet. We don't have the option of not providing a mobile interface anymore, really. There is the expectation that the systems that we're designing should be accessible through the mobile platform. And it's not even really best practice anymore to try to design a kind of trimmed down, limited functionality mobile interface. People are on their mobile devices constantly, and they expect the same levels of service and support regardless of the device that they're using. So certainly when you're looking at websites, when you're looking at cloud-based tools. So I know certainly at our organization, the time and expense tracking, all of the tools that we use, document sharing, all of that works easily as well on the mobile devices as they do on our laptops and desktops. And then item 11 here, looking at architecture requirements to design emerge from self-organizing teams. So looking at how the teams can work together to really provide the best architectures, the best configurations of systems within our organizations, and how we can push the responsibility down to these teams and provide them a lot more flexibility to be responsive to our customers. It sometimes goes against the rigid structure of ITIL, and really that's where we have to build this kind of hybrid agile ITIL methodology. So when talking about methodologies, although really these last two slides, so the manifesto and the principles make up the entire library of Agile, as it were, which is in stark contrast to the 5 thick volumes that we see in the ITIL library. But there is a lot of complementary guidance around Agile, and there are specific methodologies. So we have Lean and extreme programming and all of these other methods. I will focus on 2 with which I'm most familiar. Those are Scrum and Kanban. So I mentioned earlier I am a certified Scrum Master. That means that I'm familiar with the Scrum Lifecycle, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. I did also want to point out Kanban because it is another popular method of deploying or utilizing the Agile processes, and we'll take a look at how that can be utilized, specifically using the JIRA tools from Atlassian Software. So in the Scrum Lifecycle, I mentioned earlier one of the things that we focus on, or that I'm focusing on for today's presentation, is how Agile helps us to be more responsive. And again, focused then on being responsive to our customers' needs for better asset and configuration management. So to explain at the basic level what the Scrum Lifecycle or how it's designed. So we do have some discovery up front, so we want to make sure that we have our architecture in place, that the architecture is standardized as much as possible across development, test, and production platforms. We want to organize our project team. And the basic hallmark of a Scrum lifecycle is this idea of sprints. So we capture the requirements. We call those requirements user stories. And the user stories are then cataloged in a product backlog. So every 2 weeks, the Scrum Master and the teams determine, or really it's the development team that determines how much work can be accomplished within the next 2 weeks. They then move forward with the development. At the end of the 2 weeks, there is a review, presentation to the business owner, and a retrospective to see how can we make things better. This kind of concept of continual service improvement, again, an area where I feel there is a lot of overlap between Agile and ITIL, because the fifth phase of the ITIL service lifecycle is this idea of continual service improvement. So how do we then make things better for the next sprint? And then we go back to the product backlog. We don't ever put a stop to new requirements. So the expectation is that requirements are going to change. There are going to be new requirements. Some may be determined to be obsolete, so there may be some requirements that are, or user stories that are no longer relevant. So instead of having this long lead time and coming up with a product that may or may not fit our customers' requirements at the end, the expectation here is, as we do this iteratively, we are able to be more responsive to our customers, and really we're able to respond to new requirements, new challenges, new opportunities for growth for our business as those new opportunities come along. So I mentioned briefly this idea of the product backlog, and really what we're controlling here using this Agile method is the flow of work. So when we talk about work in progress, or WIP, again, touching on some of the items that we looked at in the discovery phase, it's important to have consistent specifications for the various platforms. We want to employ automation as much as possible. We are going through this process of continuous iterative integration and deployment. Something that we focus on and really try to amplify here is this idea of having a feedback loop. So I mentioned it briefly when we talked about the Scrum Lifecycle, that we do have a review at the end of each sprint. It's important to capture that feedback as part of this process. So you want to have the review, you want to get the feedback, you want to be able to very quickly and easily take corrective action. And we can see that employed in the Kanban example as well. So similar to Scrum in that there's planning, we have in progress, review. However, for Kanban, it's a little bit more continual. It's not organized in sprints the same way that the Scrum lifecycle is organized. But we do still have new to-dos or new stories coming in at step 1 here. We see work in progress as it's being developed. There is time for, or a specific stage for code review before the item is then marked as done. And we expect that there will be a continual inflow of new work as requirements change or as new requirements are presented to the development team. In looking at work in progress, this also allows us to see where there might be blockages, where there might be obstacles, and how we may need to restructure or refocus our efforts to eliminate. For example, if we find that too many items are being marked as in progress, that means we may not be doing code review and testing as quickly as we could be, and maybe there's some need there for automation. So we've looked at some of these Agile methods, and we now are going to look at the other side of things. We're going to look at the ITIL processes, and specifically at IT service asset and configuration management. So IT service asset and configuration management is kind of in the middle of this list of 26 ITIL processes. So certainly a much larger framework than the Agile framework. We start with strategy, we go through design, the ultimate move from design to operation during the transition phase of the life cycle, We have ongoing service operations, and then surrounding all of that, the concept of continual service improvement. So those are the 5 stages of the ITIL life cycle for those of you who may not be as familiar with ITIL. So I mentioned IT service asset and configuration is in the middle. And I would say that it is one of the processes in ITIL that really touches almost every other process within the service lifecycle. The information that's stored as part of this process is really critical for decision making throughout the service lifecycle. And the whole concept, it's not just the storage of information, but we want to identify all of our assets. And in one of the key terms here, an asset is referred to as a configuration item. So we want to identify our configuration item, or CI. We need to record that information. We want to control our CIs. Often we are undergoing audits, whether it's from external forces, external compliance with regulations, or just with internal need to know and need to have a better view into our CIs. We want to verify on a regular basis what we have, so to verify that the current state of our CIs match our baseline. We need to account for the CIs, so more on the asset management side, where we are doing the appropriate levels of accounting and inventory. We need to manage our CIs. So especially when we talk about management and control, we need to make sure that the CIs are covered by our change management process. And we need to protect those CIs. So not just from a physical standpoint, but also just we want to be sure that there are no unauthorized changes happening to those CIs. That's a protection not just for the physical boxes, but also for our business, for our reputation. Some of the key terms I just mentioned, CI or configuration item, it's really defined as any significant service component. We're talking about hardware and software here, but we could also be talking about our bandwidth, the network infrastructure. And something really critical here, I would say one of the most important words on this page is the word relationship. So beyond just inventory, we want to understand the relationships between our CIs. And I think it's important to understand this in an Agile framework, because it can be very overwhelming for organizations. You know, they start with incident, problem, change management, and then they really get stuck because there is a lot of information that they have to deal with when they're talking about configuration management. So we have configuration management databases. In version 3 of the ITIL framework, they've actually gone beyond the CMDB, and they're now talking about the CMS, which is a configuration management system, or this idea that we have several different sources that may need to be integrated into a single CMS. Configuration management encompasses not just hardware, but also software. So we have a definitive media library. Again, this desire to have simplicity and standardization is common to both Agile and ITIL when we're talking about configuration and asset management. So I've talked about a lot of concepts and theories and methodologies. What do we do now if we want to actually implement configuration management in a way that is both conforming to our ITIL framework, but at the same time employs Agile methodologies? So I would say we want to focus on quick wins. Anything that we can do to show the value to the organization. We can focus on things like automated discovery and relationship mapping. I think the one challenge that I find for most of my customers is that the asset and configuration item data can get outdated so quickly if you don't have automated discovery. So BMC has tools including the BMC client management tools, and there are other the server discovery tools that do relationship mapping with the applications in your infrastructure. So those types of tools are really critical for a successful implementation of configuration management. The integration of data within the service knowledge management systems. So whether you have Remedy, Force, or Footprints, it's really helpful to have visibility into that data for decision making. I mentioned incident and change management processes in the previous 2 sessions that I've done of this series. I talked about incident and change management, but really it's for all of your other ITIL processes. You should have visibility into the CMDB or the CMS. And also another quick win for implementation of asset and configuration management would be to have automation for build, test, and deploy. So this is kind of the other side. As you are rolling out new or changed services, it's really helpful to have automated build tools, automated testing tools, and automated deployment tools. Again, we work with a lot of organizations using BMC's client management tool for deployment to really make to really simplify and standardize asset and configuration for organizations. Some other takeaways for our discussion today. And this is the thing that I usually mention when I teach the 3-day ITIL Foundation course. One of the there's 2 things that I hope that people learn. One of them is, of course, the terminology. So it's helpful to be able to speak the same language as your peers when you're talking about IT service management. The second thing I hope people learn and understand is the importance of communication. And this RACI matrix is not unique to ITIL, but it's certainly helpful to understand first of all, in any process or activity, only one person is ultimately accountable. Also, when you put together a RACI matrix like this for an IT activity, it helps to see some lines of communication that you may not have considered. So where do people need to be consulted? Where do people need to be conformed? So for example, if we're looking at access to a particular configuration item, whether it be a database or actual physical access to a data center, how do we identify who's responsible, accountable, consulted, informed? Another side of communication, and this kind of goes back to this idea of when we're implementing a new process and we want to have quick wins and we want the support of the organization, both financially and time-wise, and in terms of the priorities of the organization, it's helpful if you can have somewhat of a marketing focus. I know in IT we don't always think of ourselves as promoters or marketers. That's not our mindset, but it is important to manage expectations for your customers, your end users, the business. Regularly communicate your success. So as you are rolling out new processes, improving your processes in the area of asset and configuration management, be sure that the organization knows, that people outside of IT know the changes that you're making for their benefit. And finally, communicate via multiple channels. So just in the same way that we are viewing information on multiple devices, multiple platforms, we communicate via multiple channels. So we may have printed posters, email, an intranet site. There are a number of different ways that we can reach our end users, and it's important that they hear from us and that they get a message tailored to the medium by which in which they're communicating with us. So to wrap up for this afternoon, I'm giving a lot of information here, but want to go back to this idea of the overlap between Agile and ITIL, and specifically in the area of continual service improvement. So in this 5th phase of the life cycle, and also as part of the Agile Principles, we have this idea of continual service improvement. And in fact, both methodologies use the Deming Cycle as a central part of their focus for an improvement process. And the Deming Cycle is simply 4 words: plan, do, check, act. It's the basis of the continual service improvement model. It's the basis of the principles of that final principle that we talked about, that to reflect on how to become more effective and how to adjust accordingly. We make our plans, we do the implementation, we report on how we're doing, we review, and then take corrective action as needed. We saw this in the Scrum Lifecycle. During each 2-week sprint, we did planning, development, review, retrospective, take corrective action for the next 2-week sprint. When we're looking at the check part of the Deming Cycle, the review, it's important that we identify KPIs, or key performance indicators. Key performance indicators for IT service asset and configuration management include a number of different areas. So we want to increase the number of CIs that we're tracking. We want to be sure that we have good reporting around configuration management. We want to see incidents linked to CIs to make sure that we're really leveraging the information that we have to maximize not just the asset and configuration management process itself, but the supporting processes as well. So in closing, it's not Agile versus ITIL. As I mentioned just 2 slides before, both methodologies embrace this concept of plan, do, check, act. Agile can really help us when we are implementing our new processes or changed processes for asset and configuration management. It can help simplify the processes themselves. When we focus on the quick wins for the organization and look at automation as much as we can, we really are seeking then to use the best of the Agile methodologies, while also being true to the structure and the guidance and governance that we have in our ITIL processes. So at this point, if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer questions. Otherwise, you can contact us at the methods seen here at rightstar.com, at our main number, or you can contact our team at sales@rightstar.com. I thank you all for your time this afternoon. I hope this has been informative and look forward to speaking with you all again.